Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I'm the manager of public programs and outreach here at the museum. And thank you all for joining us today. Welcome back to everybody who we've seen before in previous programs. This series features programs on typically Pennsylvania transit history topics, stories of the trolley era, and our collection at the museum that you can experience from home. We usually do these on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and fingers crossed, we're going to continue these as long as we have presenters. So right now we're scheduled through November. And if you have something that fits our museum mission, please let me know. That's something about Pennsylvania, the trolley era, cities where our streetcars come from. And if you have something that doesn't quite fit those guidelines, reach out anyway, because you never know. Okay, on our website at patrolley.org is where you can find a full list of upcoming programs, and I'll share that link in the chat in just a minute so you can click on it. And I want to extend a very special thank you to those of you who donated when registering for tonight's program. We really, really appreciate your support of the museum, particularly our virtual outreach programs. So thank you. Thank you very much. And for anyone who might be new, we'll quickly introduce you to the museum. We were established in 1954 as the Arden Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. And then we opened to visitors a few years later in 1963, and we're actually located along the former interurban route between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. And we've got over 50 trolleys and electric railway cars now. A couple dozen of them, about 20 to 25 or so, operate. And over 30,000 visitors per year take our 4-mile round trip ride here at the museum. So, whoops, I'm not advancing. There we go. I did want to point out that our hours right now are Tuesday through Sunday from 10 to 4. Although starting in September, once the kiddos go back to school, through next May will be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if you missed it, we are a year-round museum now. So we used to be closed January, February, March, up until Easter, but now you can come see us anytime. And, you know, pending the weather, we're giving trolley rides. All those days we're open as well. There's a photo of our high floor car 4145 during the county fair last week. Speaking of, we just finished another successful Washington County Fair Park and Ride week, where this year we had over 7,300 people take the trolley over a course of about 8 days. So that's always fun. We have 3 lots you can park in along the museum route, and we'll drop you right off at the entrance to the fairgrounds. So that's always fun. If you don't park and ride with us, you're stuck on this hill in the background of the left photo over here. You can see all the cars coming in, and that is a long walk, especially if it's muddy. So it's always fun to become a little transit system for the week. Okay, I did want to mention, for anyone local or kind of local, we are doing a Last Friday's concert series, and the next one will be next week, featuring one of our very own volunteers, Dennis Kramer and family. So Dennis plays the trombone, and I know his wife plays the piano, and it looks like some other folks from his family are involved as well. So they're playing hits from the trolley era. So that should be a lot of fun. It'll start at 6 o'clock after the museum is typically closed for the day, but we'll be open. It's just $10. Bring a chair, a picnic basket, something to drink, and it should be a lot of fun. They'll play in the gazebo out on Volunteer Boulevard. Okay. And now I would love to introduce today's presenter, Earl Hampton. So by the age of 13, Earl fell in love with the old streetcars, and he witnessed the replacement of the Canal line with buses. From riding them all over town as a youngster to photographing and recording these streetcars, he's compiled loads of history on the transit system's ups and downs. Earl authored The Streetcars of New Orleans, 1964 to present, which was published in 2010. And he co-wrote The Streetcar Guide to New Orleans, published in 2013. So this presentation that you're about to see chronicles Earl's life as a streetcar fanatic, his words, from grammar school to the present day, including the preservation of New Orleans streetcars from around the country and efforts to restore and build new streetcar lines in New Orleans. And Earl is going to show you the effect that Hurricane Katrina had on the system in 2005. And he's going to give viewers a special look at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Car 832 in service. And at the end of this presentation, we'll have a question and answer session with our presenter, but the chat box will be open throughout the show. So please feel free to enter questions or comments during the show, and we can get to those at the end. And just a note, we are recording today's program to be shared at a later date on YouTube. So thanks, Earl, for letting us do that. And at this time, I'll ask everybody to turn off their videos, and we'll keep our microphones muted so we can minimize distractions. And I will invite you guys to turn those on during the Q&A at the end. All right, Earl, if you are ready, go ahead and take it away.
All right, here we go. Okay. A warm welcome to this presentation from this New Orleans native, the Streetcars of New Orleans, for the members of the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum and guests. My name is Earl Hampton. There's my email address if you want to quickly jot it down and contact me afterward. I'd be happy to chat trolleys with you. And my screen is not moving.
If you click on it, and then you should be able to use the arrows, perhaps.
Here we go. There we go. Okay. The talk is going to span the early 1940s up to the present day. And I'm going to start by displaying this 1945 streetcar map that was provided to me by Kristen. As you can see, there were many lines in the city. I live right off of Magazine Street. There's St. Charles, which still runs today from Canal to Carrollton and Claiborne. And there were other lines. At this time in 1945, the St. Charles and Tulane were a belt line. And here's the Canal Street line going to the cemeteries, West End, Gentilly, and of course, there's the most famous streetcar in the world, Desire. This is a photograph of car 434 taken at Tulane and Broad on the St. Charles Belt. The Tulane Belt ran in the opposite direction. The 400s were built in 1918 by Pearlie Thomas Car Company, High Point, North Carolina. And these cars were a little bit different. They had pony wheels in the front, and the operator, the motorman's door on the right side was a sliding door. And that photograph was taken right here where my pointer is at Tulane and Broad. Now I'm jumping over the 800 to 972 class to the 1000 class cars on St. Claude. These had 4 motors, a level floor, and they were used up until 1949. Now, there weren't enough of these cars to save to run on Canal and St. Charles, so they were scrapped at that point. That photograph was taken right here at Canal and Rampart. Well, here's a picture of the 957 on the Magazine line. This is taken at Magazine and Napoleon. There's Casamento's restaurant in the background right there. Now, take note of this car number 957, as it'll come up again in the presentation a little further along. That photograph was taken at Magazine and Napoleon, right where my pointer is. Here's a photograph of the 899 on the West End line. It started at the river and went all the way to Lake Pontchartrain. It is shown here crossing the New Orleans Terminal, which is owned by the Southern Railroad. And that is right here. You see this gray line is the Southern. It starts at the foot of the Huey Long Bridge, goes east through town. I used to work at a tower right where my pointer is, where the Southern Cross, the L&N. It's called Any Tower. And that was the best job I ever had. I can't believe they actually paid me to work there. Okay, now we're getting on to the most famous streetcar in the world, the streetcar named Desire. Here's a photo of the 898 at the corner of Royal and St. Peter. That is right here in the French Quarter. You see right there, it says French Quarter area. While we're in the French Quarter, this is a photograph of your car, 832, on the Desire line, taken in 1943, decorated red, white, and blue to encourage people to buy U.S. war bonds. You see the gentleman in the straw hat right there in the photograph. My imagination goes wild. I think that is Tennessee Williams pondering his play, Streetcar Named Desire. Here's another photograph of the 832 right after it came out of the paint shop, decorated red, white, and blue. It was the only car that was painted this scheme. And there's no markings on the car except for the one spot right there, that window, the glass window. You can see it's the 832. Here's the 832 again, heading inbound on Canal Street at University Place, next to one of the old 400 class cars on the St. Charles Belt. 832 again. This photograph was taken by Life magazine. It's an iconic photo. The play Streetcar Named Desire started in okay, thank you. The play Streetcar Named Desire started in December of 1947. So when it was starting to become popular, Life magazine took this photograph, but it wasn't enough to save the line, unfortunately. Then came the movie in 1951, Streetcar Named Desire. The movie was filmed here in New Orleans. And if you're familiar with the story, Blanche got off an L&N train at the foot of Canal Street, walked up to a sailor, who was probably not from New Orleans, and asked him, how do I get to the corner of Elysian Fields and Royal? The sailor said, take that streetcar named Desire, coming around the turn, and transfer to a cemetery's bus at Bourbon Street. Now, this is literary license at its best, because in 1951, the Desire line had been discontinued. And the movie wouldn't have flown very well with the title, A Streetcar Named Cemeteries, or A Bus Named Desire. The gentleman that is driving the streetcar, his name is Floyd Mattier. Back in 1964, 65, when I started riding the streetcars, I actually got to meet Mr. Mattier. He was still driving a streetcar on the St. Charles line. He told me quite a few stories about the movie and how he actually was able to meet Vivian Leigh and Marlon Brando. Now, moving on to the early 60s, once all the lines were discontinued all over town, the 800s were sent to Carrollton Barn, and the 900s were mostly used on Canal Street. Here's a photograph of your 832 at the corner of Carondelet and Howard, making the turn, and that is Lee Circle in the background. Here's another shot of the 832 passing the 836 at Oak Street and Carrollton. these two cars are preserved, so I really treasure this shot. Now, color slides were hard to come by back in the early 60s, but there were a few photographers that managed to take a few pictures in color. And lots of those are available on eBay. And I'm sorry if I outbid you, but I had to have these. Here's a shot of the 832 on Canal Street inbound. The decorations on a light stand indicate that it's Mardi Gras time. So my guess is this is probably March of late February, early March of 1964. The last days of Canal Street, some of these black and white photographs that you see right here and further along in the presentation are from Otto Gessel. A lot of people that belong to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum know Otto, as he was retired from radio in New Orleans and went to Pennsylvania to care for the 832. So I think Otto was instrumental in getting the 832 up to Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. The good thing was New Orleans has Pennsylvania broad gauge, so they brought the 832, put it on the rails, and they can run it. Everywhere else, standard gauge, and the wheels have to be adjusted. Okay, now it's 1965. The Canal line is gone, and I was in 7th grade and met a boy at school who collected transfers. So his thing was to get on the streetcar and go to the outlying bus lines, get a transfer, and then ride back. I actually thought the removal of the Canal Street line was a good thing. Of course, I was young and foolish. What do I know? The transit service was improved greatly. The whole hot streetcars were removed, and they put nice air-conditioned buses, and they had express lines from the river to the lake. But then my mother bought me this book, The Streetcars of New Orleans by Lewis Hennick and Harper Charlton. And I quickly realized the error of my ways. And at that point, I started logging in information, keeping a sort of a diary, and taking photographs. I had enough information and pictures to do a dovetail work to Lewis's book. I picked up in 1964 where he left off. It says present, but it's actually 2008. So now I'm going to move on to some photographs of the old Canal streetcars, the new Canal cars, which the saying "everything old is new again" is correct in this situation. In fact, the people who tried to save the old Canal line put out a wreath at Canal and Elks Place that said, "Gone but not forever." And what a prophecy that was. My mother took me back to the cemeteries back in maybe January of 1964, gave me her Brownie camera and said, "Get out, take a picture." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, they'll be replaced by buses and you'll be happy to have this photograph." And I am. And it's the only original photograph I have of the Canal line. But then thanks to the miracle of eBay, I was able to acquire a lot of old Canal photographs in beautiful color like this one. This is the 935 heading towards the river at Carondelet Street. Okay, now it's 1964, probably around March or April. And you can see on the right here, the trees were removed in preparation for making the neutral ground thinner, taking the tracks out, the poles. I say neutral ground Everybody else in the world knows it as a median, but in New Orleans, we call it a neutral ground. The story behind that is the French were in the French Quarter, the Americans on the other side of Canal Street. They used to meet in the middle and was called a neutral ground, and it stuck. Here's the 935 heading out towards the cemeteries. You can see the road is being widened. That church in the background is a Protestant church at the corner of Jefferson Davis Parkway and Canal. Okay, now fast forward to May 31st, 1964, the last run. The 958 was the owl car. This photograph was taken around 3:30 in the morning. And usually at that time of the morning, the cars are empty. But this particular time, it was jammed with trolley fans and curious people wanting to get one last ride on the old canal. The 958 pulled into the canal barn, but it looks like it was voicing its displeasure on pulling in for the last time. It broke a trolley pole. Now, the people that were invited were able to transfer from the 958 to the 972, the ceremonial last run. It pulled out of Canal Barn with a big banner on the side that says, "See me on St. Charles." The car made a trip to the cemeteries and came back. Here it is at Carondelet and Canal, getting ready to transfer over to the St. Charles line. The utility was very anxious to start removing the tracks and wires. They got a little over ambitious and they cut the power on the car more than once. Now I'm moving on to a segment called Cars That Didn't Survive the massacre of 1964. You can see the top photo of the 929. This was probably taken the same day, May 31st. But then further the picture down below is the 929 minus trolley poles, windows, doors, getting ready to go to the scrapyard. This is quite a horror picture. They scrapped a lot of these old beautiful streetcars, cut them in half, horizontally and vertically, hauled them off for scrap. Besides the 35 cars that were retained and put on the St. Charles line, there were 13 that were saved and given to museums. This is one, the 919. Along with the 919, the 957 went to Dallas, Texas. But unfortunately, they couldn't run it, couldn't store it inside. So this is what happens after years of neglect. But in the early 80s, there was a group of people who wanted to establish a new streetcar line, first one since 1926, running along the riverfront. They were trying to build up tourism back then. So they bought two streetcars, actually three, the 919, the 920, 957 from Dallas, and the 924, which was in the underground Atlanta. The 919 was restored and given a new number, the 451. And here it is in the service area near the Canal Street end of the canal, and the canal and the river. That crane in the background is building the Aquarium of the Americas. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. There were two, when the line was established, there were two Pearlie Thomas cars and two Melbourne W2 class cars, which were handicapped accessible. So at that time, the federal government was actually happy with the line being 50% handicapped accessible. But in 1996, when the RTA wanted money to upgrade the line, the feds demanded that the line be 100% handicapped accessible. So that made 451/919 surplus again, and now it needs renovation. The 952 was brought in to the riverfront line in 1990 when the line was double tracked. I should mention that in the beginning, the line was a single track line with a passing spur at Conti Street. The cars would have to pull in and wait for the other two to pass and then go on, and that was really a problem. So they double tracked the line. They got a third Hurley Thomas car, the 952. It ran in Chattanooga at the Chattanooga Choo Choo for years, and it was deemed surplus, so they sold it back to the Regional Transit Authority in 1990, and it became the 456. So now we had 3 Pearlie Thomas cars and 3 Melbourne cars on the riverfront line. As I mentioned before, the line they wanted to upgrade the line, but the feds demanded that they be 100% handicapped accessible. So you can see in the background right there, there's a red streetcar. That is one of the 400 class cars that the RTA built. This made the 952 surplus again, so it was sent to San Francisco. Unfortunately, in the trade, we got a cable car, which we can't use. It was put on display, but the termites of New Orleans had a field day with it. It was in bad shape, so they brought it back to the barn, and there it sits. The 966 went to Birmingham, the Heart of Dixie chapter, NRHS. And here it is shown being lifted and put on a truck to go to Seashore Trolley Museum, where it was renovated, and now it is running at Lowell, Massachusetts at the National Park. Okay, now we're going to go back to 1964. There's some photographs black and white photographs of the old Canal cars taken by Otto Gessel. At that time, they switched from the canvas roof, shown here, to an aluminum roof. And they wanted to improve the appearance of the cars. So they tried these windows. They look like PCC windows, but they're not. They're actually from GM buses, the old red and cream buses that ran here that were scrapped in the 60s. That didn't last. Another variation of appearance was the doors were made solid panels instead of the indentations. And that didn't fly very, very well either. Here's a photograph of the 913. Went to the Orange Empire Trolley Museum in Paris, California. And it was sold to San Francisco's Muni system in 2005. It awaits renovation. But once it is restored, I think the San Francisco folks are going to go send the 952 back to New Orleans. But unfortunately, we won't be able to do anything with it. The only the 35 original cars that are here are grandfathered in for the ADA Compliance Act, and it can't run on Canal because it's not ADA compliant. So it'll just take up space, unfortunately. The way the cars look, though, the final decision on appearance is shown here, the 906. Very nice. And now we're going to show you some more of my eBay acquisitions. The 908 at the cemeteries, the 952 inbound at Carondelet Street, the 940 outbound just past Burgundy Street. And if you look at it, it's spelled Burgundy, but we pronounce it Burgundy in New Orleans. The 911 at Claiborne. Okay, now this map represents the system almost correct. It's missing one little piece. Shown here is the St. Charles line in dark green. And that route has not changed since I became a trolley fan in 1963. In fact, the last time it was changed was back in the 50s when the St. Charles Belt and Tulane Belt was discontinued. Here down at the bottom shows the blue, that's the riverfront line that was established by the Bring Our Home Committee, Bring Our Streetcars Home Committee, ran from Julia Street to the French Market. In 1997, when the Regional Transit Authority decided to build 6 cars, there was a connector line put in between the St. Charles and the river, and the gauge on the riverfront was changed from railroad track gauge, standard gauge, to Pennsylvania broad gauge. So that way the riverfront cars could return to Carrollton Barn at night. And then in 2004, the opening of the Canal line to the cemeteries with a branch to City Park. Then the Loyola line was put in 2013, I think. What's not showing here is the Rampart line. The Loyola streetcar used to run all the way down to the river, but now it makes a left turn at Rampart and goes to Elysian Fields. This is a photograph of them putting in the rails on Canal Street back in 1997. Now, earlier I mentioned, remember the 957, here it is in deplorable condition coming back from Dallas. It was restored and became the 457, but this caused quite a controversy because this is a 100-year-old car, and the Transit Authority cut a hole in the side of the car to have wheelchair access. We didn't want them to do that to the other cars. So that's when they built cars from the ground up. Here's a photograph of the 461 at Carrollton Barn. Between 1997 and 2004, the riverfront cars were kept there overnight. So it was quite a sight to see the red cars going back and forth on St. Charles Avenue. Now, I'm showing you this photograph because this paint scheme was the original one with the number in the sign box and big letters in the front, riverfront. There was, the 461 was the only homemade car that survived Hurricane Katrina. It was at Carrollton Barn to get a paint job. The then Mayor Ray Nagin wanted the riverfront line to be blue, the canal red, and the St. Charles green, and Lord knows where else we would have gone from there. But it never took off. The blue scheme didn't last very long. In fact, now the 461 is in service on St. Charles. The line is now handicapped accessible, but very limited. So 1997 came they were talking about extending the canal line back to the cemeteries. So they built 2 cars, the 2001, 2002, and they used those 2 cars on the line between Baronne, the river, and the French Market. And it was quite successful, so they built 22 other cars. And here's a photograph of of tracks getting ready to be laid on Canal Street in 2002. More cars were built. If you look right here where my pointer is, you can see it says 2017. Now, if you take the amount of cars that we have at Carrollton, you had 35 St. Charles cars, you had 7 Riverfront, and now all of a sudden you've got 24 more red cars. You had a space problem. There wasn't enough room to store these cars. You can see it's kind of jammed up here. This photograph shows cars in various stages of construction. It was so jammed up that the transit authority had to store partially built streetcars on the street. Once they were finished, they were tested on St. Charles, make sure they ran right. And then finally, opening day came April 18th, 2004. Now, the story at that point was the first Canal car to come out the barn at 4:30 in the morning. There were a big throng of people. The Bring Our Streetcars Home Committee organized this by giving people numbers as they showed up. I had number 57. So my chances of getting on the first car were actually pretty good. But the problem was the operator came out of the barn, stopped short, picked up his family, and then mayhem broke out. We complained to the RTA police that we had all this organized, but he didn't care. He just said, it's just another first run for a bus out the barn. Poor fella. Maybe it will convert him one day. Here's a photograph of Otto Gessel. He was in New Orleans for the opening of the canal line on April 18th. Then came Dedication Day, May 30th, 2004. This is almost exactly 40 years to the day when the old canal line was taken off after the 972 made its last run. You can see in this photograph right here, we have some distinguished riders that were on the first ceremonial car, getting on the car using the wheelchair access. And a tent was set up for Mayor Nagin and other dignitaries to speak. But unfortunately, they didn't know any better. What I'm circling right here is a cable car. It's like, really? Come on, man. Everything was fine from 2004, the opening day. The line was heavily used. Cars were operating good. But then Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans on August 29th, 2005. The center of the storm actually went east of New Orleans, which put a north wind over Lake Pontchartrain. The water got into the canals, and the levees were breached. The city filled up with water. In fact, the streetcars, the water was to the bottom of the windows. And it wouldn't have been so bad if it was just water. But the problem was they had diesel, oil, gasoline, lots of other nasty components at Canal Barn. And that's quite a toxic mix for those cars to be sitting in for 2 weeks. Now, the infrastructure on Canal was fine, not on St. Charles. The overhanging trees on St. Charles came down, took down the lines, and unfortunately, they didn't restore service on St. Charles fully until 2008. But they hooked up a couple of the green Pearly Thomas cars to tow trucks, brought them down St. Charles, and borrowed a generator from the Boston Transit Authority hooked up the line, and it worked. Here's 947 inbound at Jefferson Davis. So Red's out of service, Pearlie's to the rescue. Now in this photograph, this is taken at Broad Street, Broad and Canal, shows two cars, one heading towards the river, one heading towards the cemeteries. Now, there was no markings on these cars for Canal or City Park or anything. It just had special St. Charles and car house. The only way that you could tell, actually probably it should be just me and nobody else. This car is marked 01, run number 1. That was the cemetery's car. Run number 30, they didn't actually have 30 cars out here. They only had maybe 2 at the most. Going to the Carrollton line. This one's running on the Carrollton line to get to the Museum of Art. And then there was the problem of the Pearlie Thomas cars. These doors on the left side of the operator were inoperable. So the operator had to put people out into the street. Between the river and Canal, the river and Claiborne Avenue, it's fine. You know, it's easily, there's plenty of room to let people off. I was talking to Elmer Von Dullen, who's the superintendent of maintenance at Carrollton Barn. I said, what are you going to do about the door situation? He says, what's the problem? I said, well, you're going to be letting people out into the street on Canal past Claiborne. I said, could you change the configuration of the doors to let people off in the middle, like shown here? And he said that he couldn't do it, that he only had 3 people to maintain the cars after Katrina. Here's one of my favorite shots of the 965 inbound at Canal and North Peters. That's the U.S. Customs House in the background. And the Marriott Hotel is the beige building. And excuse me, I need a sip of water. I'm back. So here it is, 2006. It's 1964 all over again. Pearlies were running up and down Canal Street. But then the Reds came back. In 2007, the RTA got some money from FEMA to repair the cars. They needed all new electrical. And when they did 4 cars at a time. So when 4 came back into service, they put them on the Carrollton and City Park line and the Riverfront line, which made the most sense because you would have had to, the Pearlies on Carrollton Avenue, they had to stop. The operator had to go to the other end of the car and let people off because you were letting people out into 2 lanes of traffic. It was really a bad situation. But once the red cars came back, my favorite thing to try to do was get a red and a green meet. It was kind of hard to time these. I'd park in a certain spot trying to guess where the red car would pass the green car. In this situation, the red car was delayed a little bit, so I had to run down the block and a half, 2 blocks to catch the shot. Of course, I was in better shape back then. And this, I think, is the best one, the 961 and the 2004. To the left is Rampart Street. To the right of 961 is Elks Place and Basin Street. The light had changed to red. I pulled up, stopped, got out, got this shot. I didn't care who was mad at me. But it was a really not a great day. You can see it's cloudy. It just rained, but still, this is one of my favorites. At that point, when there was enough red cars to go back into service, I had the idea to approach the Regional Transit Authority and to do another little ceremony like back in 1964, where 972 would make a second last run. Put a banner on the side of the car saying, "See me on St. Charles." Pulled up to Carondelet Street, let everybody off, get on a red car, which was a happier situation than a bus. And I even offered to pay for the two rental cars, but the RTA said nope, that they wouldn't allow it because it would interrupt service. Now back then, cars would pass every 30 minutes. So I said, what service? You don't have any out there. But they did turn me down, but I decided, well, I'm going to take a ride on 972, and that'll be my second last run. So now things are, quote, normal again. The Reds are back on Canal. The Greens are back on St. Charles. And this is the end of my presentation. Mr. Pearlie's on Canal. But I have one more thing I'd like to mention. Unfortunately, my history book is out of print. But I do have a second book published called Streetcar Guide to New Orleans. It's still available on eBay. Now, in the Department of Thanks, I've got many thanks to Otto Gessel for the wonderful black and white photographs of the old canal line. May he rest in peace. Also, thanks to George Freeman and Mike Strauss for photo sharing. George has a wonderful website. If you Google Canal Street Spectacular, you'll see an extensive history of the old canal, the canal line from beginning to now. And Mike Strauss has a wonderful site called streetcarmike.com, featuring San Francisco streetcars and New Orleans. And the end, I will now take questions. Give it back to Kristen.
Great. Thank you so much, Earl. I did write down some questions from the chat. So feel free to turn your videos on, everybody. I'll let you unmute in just a second. Before we get to questions, I did want to mention really quick what is coming up here at the museum. And we'll get to questions in just a second. But we actually do one of these Trolleyology programs about once a month, sometimes twice a month. And next month, in lieu of a traditional Trolleyology, I will be presenting a program with the New York Transit Museum on September 19th. And note, this is earlier than usual. We're doing 6 p.m. instead of 7 p.m. So bring your dinner. And me and my friend Polly from the New York Transit Museum will be talking about comparing and contrasting our museums. Really should be a lot of fun. Our next official Trolleyology will be October 15th, a century plus of Philadelphia trackless trolleys from Bob Wright. And this is actually a two-part program with part 2 before part 1. So he's starting with the modern system, well, 1968 to present, and then he's going to come back a few months later and do part 1. And then October 29th, we'll have a West Penn Railways presentation from Harvey Lehner. This will not be recorded, so make sure you tune in when we air it, because that is going to be amazing. It's Harvey told me that it's kind of a conversation between him and PTM's former archivist, Ed Leibarger, who's very familiar with the system. And so that should be a real treat. And then just scheduled, actually like 5 minutes before this program started, we're going to have George Gula on November 20th doing electric cars in the Electric City Scranton program. So we'll get to questions now, but I did want to thank you all for joining us, and thanks so much to Earl for presenting. If you want to support the museum, you can become a volunteer, a member, make a donation at patrolley.org/support. So I made or I put that link in the chat so you can click right on it. Okay, so let me get to some of the questions here. Oh, one of my questions, which was, so the new cars that they built, Earl, are they also hand control, like hand operated, like the old cars, or have they modernized the controls at
It
all?
has a it has a joystick.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And forward is acceleration, backwards is brake. So, and the doors are controlled by switches, so it's not very authentic.
Yeah, there were some comments about the fake clerestory, clustery, whatever roof on the new cars. Any any theory behind why they added those fake, you know?
They did that to hide the air conditioning.
I was gonna say it's probably something to do with air circulation.
Yeah, because the first 6 cars that they built were exactly to the specifications of the 900 class cars we have. And the the transit authority wanted the new car, the other 24, to be air conditioned. So to hide the quote ugly air conditioner unquote, they put a fake clerestory roof up there. I asked Elmer Von Dullen, the superintendent of maintenance. I said, maybe you can actually light up the windows, and he says, I'm not doing anything else to make it to cause maintenance problems down the line. It's just going to cover it up, and that's it. So they do not, the windows do not light up. They do not open like on the old 400 class cars. Like the Streetcar Named Desire exhibit, those windows do open, but these do not. So, okay, any other
Yeah,
questions?
another question. So in I think it was 2003, 2004, they had that storage problem where, they were parking cars outside. Did they ever build more barns, or was that a historic barn they were using, or like a former bus garage, or where are the cars stored nowadays?
Okay, they were built at Carrollton Barn. That's where they had the space problem. They were
Okay.
in the process of laying rails on Canal Street, and they actually used the old Canal streetcar barn, parts of it, to store the red cars at night now. That's that photograph I showed after Katrina when the flooding hit.
Okay.
That was taken at Canal Barn.
We had a question from one of our viewers, Steve. Did you collect the 20-cent stamps that had the streetcars on them? One of them had the New Orleans car.
Yes, I did. I've got first day issues
Oh,
from Kenny Bunkport, Maine,
uh-huh.
with the 4 cars and a stamp on it, and I've got a sheet of the 20-cent stamps of every fourth one is the 953 in New Orleans. Now that's one thing. They did put a plaque on the 953, but they won't allow me to do anything with the 922, which was used in the movie Streetcar Named Desire. People get on that car and don't realize that it's history, the marvelous history. But they will not put a plaque. I'm hoping I'm applying to become the RTA historian, and that's in the works right now. I'm hoping to maybe put some car cards on the inside where the advertisements are, like Blanche sat here, or you're riding the Streetcar Named Desire from the movie in 1951. Just something to tell people. It'd be perfect to put up a plaque, but they said they couldn't alter the appearance of the cars. I said, well, 953's got a plaque, and there's lots of things on the cars that have altered the appearance, like those horrible strobe lights at the bottom. But it's safety, so I can't complain.
Um, and you pretty much answered this, but all the new cars, they were built in New Orleans by RTA, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
there were plans to continue building more cars, either for sale or to use on more lines that would be established But then Katrina hit, the workforce was scattered to the four winds, and all those plans went out the window. And were blown out the window by the hurricane. The unfortunately, let's see what I was going to say. I lost my train of thought. Like I said before, like I mentioned before, there was plans to build more cars. I think they had a contract at one point with Tampa to build some cars, and there was also a contract in the works with Disney, but that all fell through when Katrina hit. So.
There was a comment in the chat from Justin in Chattanooga. He's the former historian at the Chattanooga Choo Choo, who had the pleasure of being the motorman on the Hurley Thomas car that was retired there in 2015. He says, I know you're aware because I showed you a photo. Unfortunately, it's been converted into a poolside bar / cabana. So very sad, but
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw a photograph of it being hauled away, but nobody knew where it went. And then I think you showed me some photographs of it, Kristen, where it was converted into like a bar.
Yep.
But,
yeah. And it's still yellow.
Yeah, it's wrong color.
Let's see. Jack Demian, who I believe you know, says,
Yes.
When are you coming to PTM?
Well, I'm actually pretty close right now. I'm in Seven Devils, North Carolina, which is near Boone. So I'm pretty close.
New Orleans.
I'm not in New Orleans at the present time. No,
but
I have escaped the heat. It was 92 degrees there today and 66 here. So that's why I'm here.
Excellent. A comment from Bram Bailey, one of our volunteers. He says, on the new cars, it looks like they're running on PCC trucks. Are they similar? Are they the same? Do you know anything about the trucks?
They actually tried in the beginning with the 6 cars they built. They got PCCs from Philadelphia and tried to use the electrical components in those cars, but it was a complete failure. The cars had the brakes were bad. The cars were bouncing all over the place. So they decided to go with Brookville. Those are Brookville components. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with Brookville. I think that's in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, not too far from here.
In the beginning, they used the CKD motors and wheels. That's from Czechoslovakia. And we had a Czechoslovakian streetcar at one point running alongside the 2001 and 2002 on the Canal line. They were trying to promote their product, so they loaned that car to New Orleans. I'm not exactly sure what you would call the wheels on the current cars, but they were installed by Brookville after Katrina. So
okay. You should be able to unmute yourselves now. So Ed Kohler, I see you have your hand up.
Hello. Actually, one question was answered while I was going. I want to thank Mr. Hampton for the presentation, and Kristen, I want to thank you for organizing it. And it's interesting. I work as a tour guide about one day a month, so at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. And what's interesting is when we have the 832 in the building, I always ask the tour group, are you familiar with Streetcar Named Desire? And it's interesting how few people remember it. After a while, I start talking about it, they begin to recognize it, but it's not, it might be in the New Orleans psyche, but in Western Pennsylvania, and even here in New York City where I live, it's not so prominent.
It's a classic movie.
I understand. Yeah. We're not arguing. I'm just saying my experience.
Yeah, and there was a remake in the 80s using the 948 on St. Charles, it was starring Anne Margaret, and she got on the streetcar and got off at Jenna Street on St. Charles and magically was transported through the wonders of film editing to Elysian Fields and Royal. So it was totally wrong.
Recreations are the death of remakes are the death of creativity, and we'll just leave it at that, sir. Thank you again, and Kristen, thank you again.
Sure. Earl, I loved how you said it doesn't make sense, or it wouldn't have had the same ring to it if it was a streetcar named Cemeteries.
Yeah, that was done. Like I say, that's literary license at its best.
Yeah.
Streetcar Named Cemetery might make a good horror film.
Yeah.
And didn't we have that presentation on streetcar lines to funeral streetcar lines to
yeah, about
cemetery?
a year ago we had
yeah.
cemetery transit, a history of death riding the rails. So
Right, yeah.
Well, people in New Orleans don't even think twice about getting on a streetcar marked cemeteries, so it's kind of a daily experience.
Well, and the cemeteries are different there too, right? So
right, they're all above ground.
Yeah.
When New Orleans was first established, they went to bury a few people, I guess, and they dug 6 feet down. They hit water, so they had to put the graves above ground. So,
George, I see you have your hand up. You should be able to. Oh, you're already unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, George.
I'm George Friedman. I just wanted to introduce myself, Earl's fellow historian, if you will. We bought a lot of pictures together off of eBay. I'm real glad to be with you all tonight. Earl, you take care of yourself. The new streetcars, after Katrina, ridership is way down because frankly, the population went way down. A lot of people just moved away. And so they've got enough streetcars with the 24 and the 7 from Riverfront to take care of all their needs for a while yet, even with opening a couple of new but short lines.
Good point, George.
Yeah. Those new ones that were built, the 24 and the 7, the bodies were deliberately made to look as close to the 900s as possible, except for the color. But the trucks, the controls, all very modern. In fact, under the hood, so to speak, those cars are LRVs.
Okay.
We don't call them that, but that's effectively the electronics that they have, the power systems that they have.
Okay. Thanks for the info.
Thanks for having me.
Earl, I'm so glad that you, that we connected because I have been trying to find a New Orleans presenter for Trolleyology for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. And I'd reached out to the RTA several times with no response. So thanks to Jack Demian for connecting us. So I really appreciate you taking the time tonight. I saw
my great pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, there's lots of nice comments in the chat, by the way, if you haven't seen
them. I haven't seen them, but
okay.
I've done a few presentations locally. The Jefferson Parish Library, the Orleans Parish Library, Nunez Community College in Chalmette, Louisiana. I've given some talks similar to this, and I adjusted talk to include and feature the 832 because of the of your acquisition. And it's on my bucket list to make it to Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. And it would really be on my bucket list if I could drive 832. I'm not officially qualified, but I know how to drive a streetcar.
Yeah, we saw you behind the controls in that photo at the beginning in the biography.
Oh, that's the streetcar named Desire exhibit that was in the French market.
Oh, yeah.
And what happened was I used to hang out there all the time. In fact, I used to try to keep the car clean, maintained, light bulbs and painting, that sort of thing. And the fellow that was working there, his name was Byron Pulley. Now, that's a Pulley. I think it was a kind of a name that he made up. I think his real name was Bob Byron. But either way, when he left the job, he obviously endorsed me to take over. So I applied at the Louisiana Tourist Commission, got the job, but then right at that particular time, the French Market Corporation hooked up to 453 and pulled it out from the exhibit area where it was nicely covered, out of the weather, put it in the flea market area where it was exposed, and now it's in horrible condition. I'm hoping the RTA will cosmetically restore 453. The inside's fine. The exterior needs a paint job. And maybe I can use that as my office as historian. So
okay. I did see actually a minute ago, Nikki T had a hand up. I didn't know if you still wanted to chat.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just didn't want to interrupt anyone.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
So I'm a newbie to streetcars. Luckily enough, 2 years ago, I was able to go to New Orleans and had my first experience riding the red cars. And so that was an exciting adventure. But now we did ride the green cars on St. Charles, but the ride was quite different. And so I interpreted that as that they weren't powered the same. And obviously I'm quite naive on how these vehicles run. And so I just didn't know if the green cars, and this was 2022, are run differently. Then obviously they don't have the long arms attached to the power lines as the red cars do. So how are the green cars being powered? Because it sounded like an engine, but I didn't think it was.
Well, the green cars are original, built in 1923 and 24. So they're 100 years old.
Oh,
a lot
wow.
of cool technology in that. They have a rheostat controller, they have air brakes,
They're quite noisy.
Yeah, they're very noisy. And the red cars, George mentioned that they're the equivalent of a light rail vehicle.
Yes.
Under the hood. So that's the difference. The technology is extremely old on the green cars and very new on the reds.
So it was very nice to experience both of them and have that exposure to that culture that I had always wanted to. So this is my first presentation to view. So I really appreciate all the time and effort that you put into all of this. And it's really exciting to hear from you, sir.
Oh, thank you very much.
We'll take the same power, 600 volts DC from the trolley wire. They all work off the same power source.
Yeah, I was going to mention that and I forgot. Thank you, George.
Nikki, thanks for joining us. It's kind of like that at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum too. Some of our older cars like make all the right noises, like all those like classic streetcar noises. And then some of the PCCs, the newer cars the newer cars from the 40s, they're much smoother by design and they don't make all those same like clickety clack noises that you hear. So
and those are the sounds that we love. That would just takes you back. So thank you very much for answering my question, sir.
The green cars have the sound of the motors, the grind of the motors. You have the
Yeah.
knocker, knocker, knocker on the compressor. And of course, you got the bells.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Yes, and that's what I was curious. I was like, this doesn't sound the same as the other ones.
No,
And
the other
obviously
ones are
knowing
completely
that they
different.
were older, but it was very curious how on the main road they had the red ones and the green ones going through St. Charles, because we were taking that to head to Ann Rice's house. So but it was a lovely experience, and I hope to be able to go there again to explore more.
Buy my tour book and you'll know what you're looking at.
I will get that on Audible or Amazon. Absolutely.
Good plug.
It's available for on eBay. Actually
There you
very
go.
inexpensive. It
I'm just
retails
starting
for
to learn
$15. It
Hey,
retails
when you
for
were looking at
$15,
Ann Rice's house, right next door was the Manning's house.
I'm sorry,
Okay, so
I
next.
missed that, Ed.
Oh, sorry. He's talking about the house next to the Rice house. The Manning's house? Manning house?
You're talking about Archie Manning and
Wasn't it Eli Manning and what Eli Manning's father
Manning.
at one time there?
they grew up in the Garden District, yes. But it's off the St. Charles line. It's on First Street, a few blocks.
My
towards the-
mistake.
But
Okay. Let's see. Next we have Father Jack. Go ahead, Jack.
hi, Jack.
Earl, good to see you actually somewhat in person. I know we connected over Facebook, so this is
Yes.
the next step in the progression. Hopefully, my next visit to New Orleans, we can maybe actually get together for a cafe or olé or something like that.
That sounds
But,
good. At the end of the Canal line, they have the new Morning Call coffee and donut shop.
Oh, nice. Oh, great.
So that's a perfect way to ride the streetcar, have coffee and donuts, and ride back. So
Sounds like a perfect way to begin the day.
or you could take the riverfront down to Jackson Square and get the original Cafe du Monde coffee and beignets. So,
I'm not sure if I had the patience. I'm a Yankee to wait in line at the Cafe du Monde. But anyways, well, speaking of which, I also enjoy eating at that Mexican restaurant there at the corner of Carrollton and Jeanette, watching the evening pull-ins. That's always a
okay.
nice thing to do, just even though that's not typical New Orleans cuisine. But anyways, I was going to ask, one of the things that really struck me in my visits to New Orleans is the comparison to San Francisco. You know, as you know, you have the folks at Market Street Railway as a nonprofit kind of supporting historic transit in San Francisco. And it always occurred to me that that would be something that would be a wonderful asset to have in New Orleans. You're talking about 453 and these other historic cars. And I wonder if the city or just even the businesses along the streetcar lines would ever consider supporting, establishing some type of nonprofit to kind of support these kind of endeavors.
We tried in the late 60s, early 70s to establish a trolley museum in New Orleans. It failed miserably. We were overrun by train buffs. It became the New Orleans chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. I used to be the editor of the newsletter. It was called Open Track. I used to put lots of streetcar stuff in there, and they would always grumble at the meetings, why don't you have some train stuff in there? You know, it's like, okay, send me something. I'd be delighted to put it in. Nobody ever did. So eventually I just resigned, and the NRHS kind of went by the wayside. We did manage to do several steam excursions, though, from New Orleans to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, using the Southern 722, the 4501, and the SNA 630. So and the 750. So that was kind of fun. It was worth it for that. But about 2003, Ed Brantley and I tried to start up the trolley club again, and it never really got off the ground. People people were saying, like, if you could buy a piece of property somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and have a New Orleans streetcar there, why should I come out there when I can ride one on St. Charles for $1.25, you know? So it kind of made sense, but unfortunately, we probably should have some sort of watchdog committee or something. But because the RTA, some of the things they've done to the St. Charles cars are downright nasty. They've got the strobe lights. They've got inside of the car has a big giant piece of plexiglass behind the operator, so you can't stand behind next to the operator and catch the breeze. You can't. It has these giant signs that show where you are and announce every stop, and it's really obnoxious. I don't like it myself. I preferred when the motorman used to yell out, you know, Jackson Avenue, you know, coming up, or Nashville, you know, but not anymore. In fact, a lot of things have changed. We went from two-man operation to one man in 1971. The conductor went by the wayside. The conductor's bells, which were common back then, are gone. The old International R11 register that you have on the 832, we had them on every car. I've got two of them in my collection. I'm hoping to display it at the RTA and you know, ring up fares for keep track of the people that come and see me. But a lot of changes, and some were for the good. The cars were back in the 60s had wooden vestibules and wooden windows, and they took those off and made it all aluminum. They changed the trolley poles from the slides to the swivel, like used on the trolley buses, and that turned out to be pretty disastrous because 930 was heading downtown in April of 1970, and a tree grabbed the wire, the pole jumped, caught the cross arm, pulled the whole thing down, 600 volt dead short on the roof, and it had a hole the size of a swimming pool in the roof. And I said, well, I guess this will be the first car since 1964 to be scrapped. Well, 930 arose out of the ashes. They did a beautiful job of renovating the car. And in fact, one of the gentlemen back at the RTA told me, he said, if we can rebuild a 930, we could build cars from the ground up. And then in 1997, his prophecy came to pass. I still get a little goosebumps thinking about that, you know. But anyway, the RTA did a wonderful job with the 400 class cars and the 2000s. A lot of people don't like that clear story roof. I'm kind of hit or miss on it. But I do like to ride the new cars and the old cars, you know, both. So I hope that answers your question.
All right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jack.
No, it does. Yeah, thanks. It just it always just struck me that there's a lot more potential there in New Orleans to really make the transit seem to be really a way to attract visitors. So I'm glad that you're doing the Lord's work there by trying to be the historian for the RTA.
Wow.
That position hasn't been filled since 2003. The story behind that was when the Pearlies came back from Atlanta, Dallas, and Chattanooga to run on the riverfront line. The RTA established the historian position and gave it to a lady named Marie Finhold. And she was an operator back in World War II. She drove the streetcars back then. She used to drive cars on Desire Line, she told me. And when the war ended, the men came back. The the women were let go, and she decided to become a nun. So she wasn't happy with that, left the nunnery about 1975 or so, went back to driving streetcars. This lady could drive a streetcar. She was very fast. In fact, everybody used to called her the flying nun. So it was fun to ride with Marie and talk to her. And then when she retired from that, she became the historian, and we used to go back to the barn and sit and talk to Marie, and a bunch of other trolley fans would all join together and just sit around and talk. But unfortunately, she passed away in 2003, and the position hasn't been filled since. And I'm actively trying to get them to restore that position, and I'd like to have it.
I think you probably deserve it based on how many great stories you have and how long you've been documenting the system. You know, I don't see why not. George, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I do. First of all, wonderful presentation. I've never been in New Orleans. That's on my bucket list. And the pictures
gotta
are
come.
wonderful. Pardon?
You got to come.
Trying to. The photos were wonderful, and particularly since I did a show on World War II, it was interesting to see not only a patriotically painted New Orleans car, but gee whiz, ours.
Yes, it's yours.
Now I have a question, because I spent my entire career at the Port Authority and doing a lot of work with the disabled community. When the first phase of the T opened, the only requirements for disabled were to have key stops. By the time the second phase opened, all the stops had to be equipped for disabled. So you've got the old cars running on St. Charles. What's the reaction, or if there is any, from the disabled community on those inaccessible cars?
Okay, the pot was basically stirred by a boy named Jacob, I believe his name was. He was in a wheelchair, wanted to ride the St. Charles cars. He's got videos on YouTube of him in a wheelchair. A green car would pull up, open the doors, and the operator would say, "Nope, you can't ride, leave." Well, I spoke to him on an occasion. I said, you know, you've got to understand that these cars are ancient. They're old. It would horribly change the appearance if you made them handicapped accessible. So eventually a lawsuit came about to make St. Charles accessible. The old cars are grandfathered in, but they took 4 of the riverfront cars, painted them green. You remember that photograph of the 461?
Yeah.
In green? That particular car and 3 others run on St. Charles, but unfortunately, they run every 45 minutes.
Oh,
So if you're in a wheelchair in 95-degree heat and you just miss one, you have to wait 45 minutes for another one to come up. And the second problem is not all the stops are handicapped accessible. Only the major stops, Lee Circle, Jackson, Louisiana, Napoleon, and so on. Big giant gaps between stops. So if you're in a wheelchair at Washington Avenue, you got to tool down to Louisiana, which is about 8 blocks to get on a streetcar. So now they're got $5 million from the federal government to explore how they can make it a better system. My guess is what they'll probably do is they'll probably try to put handicap accessible stops at every stop, and then paint the rest of the riverfront cars. You still have 3 more.
Mhm.
These are exact copies of Hurley Thomas cars. So if you look at this car, you say, "Oh, that's a nice green streetcar. Let's take a ride." But it's a horse of a different color completely. As Nikki said, you know, a few minutes ago, she said she got on the green cars and they were noisy, and red cars were quiet and have air conditioning, which is, New Orleans air conditioning is 4 windows down and 40 miles an hour, but anyway, they had 7 cars, 1 original and 6 homemade cars that were running on the riverfront line. Like George said a few minutes ago, we have enough cars to cover all the services necessary, and we have a few spares. So now they've taken the homemade Pearlie Thomas cars, which are called Von Dullens, by the way, in honor of Elmer Von Dullen, and they've taken those, and they got the 3 that are not running in storage. So my guess is they'll probably bring them to the barn, paint them green, and they'll be out on St. Charles. So they may have like 7 regular cars with a wheelchair car right behind. So the service will be a little bit better. So,
was the lawsuit been settled then, or?
Gosh, I haven't followed up on that recently. I know there was an original lawsuit to make the St. Charles handicapped accessible. It was grandfathered in before that, but there's a second lawsuit. This fellow with a 5-year-old in a wheelchair tried to get on a non-handicapped stop, and they refused it. So he's suing now to make every stop handicapped accessible. So it can be done. The stops would need to move to the middle of the neutral ground, the median, middle of the median, and let's see what. The stops need to move to the middle of the median, and like I say, if you have a regular car go by, a handicapped car would be right behind it, so the service would be better for the folks in wheelchairs. I don't have anything against folks in wheelchairs, but we have to keep history alive and keep the 900s as original as possible.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you for your answer.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Philip, you have your hand up, and then Harvey.
Okay, I was in New Orleans in November, stayed in the historic, well, it was on St. Charles Avenue.
The Collins Hotel, maybe?
Yeah, stayed right.
Okay.
It was right on St. Charles, near Martin Luther King.
Ooh.
And there was a small, like a bed and breakfast, but it was an odd sort of thing. You checked in and you never saw anybody ever.
Okay.
But anyway, stayed there and spent the weekend there. Rode all the lines almost all the lines. I didn't get the Union Station one, and it took me a while to figure out. I couldn't understand about the difference in trucks. And now I understand now what that was all about. And I did notice, I talked to one of the motormen there. He was quite fascinated with our operation at the East Broad Top. So kind of both interested in each other's operation. Well, anyway, he said that the newer cars, the riverfront, they were like running an airplane with their lever control.
Joystick, yeah.
Joystick, exactly. But the one thing I noticed, and you bring it up, is you got a little bit of a problem here because you got a transit system to carry people, obviously tourists, but you have locals. And so on the one hand, you want it to be historic, and the other hand, you want it to be useful. The Canal Street line in particular seemed painfully slow.
I think the problem is the fare collection.
Mm-hmm.
And also you have the U-turns coming on the cross streets. The cars would go a block and they'd almost have to stop at every block because there's a car in the middle blocking the tracks. At one point, they did talk about closing long stretches of Canal Street, so there would be a nice run for the cars, say between Galvez and Broad, and then Broad to Jeff Davis, and then Jeff Davis to Carrollton, and so on. So the cars would be faster at that point. But the main problem is the fare collection. It's painfully slow, because people try to feed money into the fare box, and it goes and it rejects your dollar bill, and and it just slows up the whole operation. Sometimes the operator will take it and shove it in his pocket, but
Have you done anything with signal priority?
no, not at all.
That would help.
I don't think there's ever been anything done with traffic signals in New Orleans regarding the streetcars. I do remember when I was a kid, the motorman would show me his watch and say, "Watch now, and when the second hand hits 12, that light's going to turn green." So at one point, the city did time the lights, but not anymore. They just don't care or have the folks to do it. So, but I think the problem with the Canal line being so slow is the fare collection. If they had a better system, then it would be speed things up. I do know one time where I was in San Diego, and I got on the street the red streetcars to pay, and there was no way to pay. You had to buy your ticket at the kiosk at the station, and it's like we got on the car and the car's taken off, and we have no ticket. Luckily, we didn't get stopped, but maybe something like that would help. I'm not sure what would improve service, but just flash your ticket to the operator and get on and go. So
Good discussion. And then next we have Harvey, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
Okay, I won't take too long.
oh,
Earl, I'm Harvey Lehner. I'm in Los Angeles, and thanks for a very good presentation on a subject that we don't get to see that much of very often. Thanks, Kristen, for putting this together. Do you get fan trips very often at all?
no, not at all.
Well, I may
The
have been.
last time we had a fan trip was 1993. We were celebrating 90 years of electrification on St. Charles. And I've had a birthday party or two to go to on the St. Charles line. They do rent streetcars to anyone that wants to rent one. There's a carnival group called the Funny 40 Fellows, and it's spelled PHUNNY, PHORTY, PHELLOWS, Funny 40 Fellows. And that they rent a streetcar, goes down to Canal Street and comes back on St. Charles, and they have everybody's in costume, and they throw beads out the car, and that's one of the highlights. That signals the beginning of Mardi Gras season in New Orleans.
I may be able to tell you about the first fan trip in New Orleans. Back in 1957, 5 of us founding members of the Orange Empire Trolley Museum, today Southern California Railway Museum, decided to take a trip back east to ride the last streetcar lines in the east. And we started out through El Paso and got to New Orleans and decided we wanted to charter a streetcar. And it was an interesting challenge because it was NOPSI back in those days, New Orleans Public Service Incorporated. And they did not understand why we wanted to charter a streetcar. 5 teenage kids, really. And they were suspicious of us because, unfortunately, there was segregation still. The cars were segregated back in the 50s. And they were suspicious of our motives, if we wanted to make a thing about that and all that. And they had never heard of a rail fan. So it took us longer than we expected to get the charter paid for, because we were directed, I think we went to the Canal barn, and they said, you got to go to the general offices and talk to them about renting a streetcar, getting a charter streetcar. So we did. And I think the NOPSI offices were on Canal Street back in those days. Or
the main office was on Barone, 317 Barone Street. And it's now a hotel. It's called the NOPSI Hotel.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And I think it was like $5 an hour to charter a streetcar back in those days. We used to do it in LA. Yeah. But so we each kicked in, we each bought an hour or whatever and did it. But it may have been the first fan trip.
The first rail fan trip that I can recall seeing photographs of was the 1963 Electric Railway Historical. Wait, that's not right. George would know. ERA. And they rented car
Electric Rail Fans Association.
What year was that?
1963.
Okay, that was after the first trip.
Okay.
And we had a lot of fun on that trip, and the motorman did not understand what our fascination was with a streetcar. I mean, he operates these historic cars. Canal was still operating in the original cars and everything back in those days.
I hope he took photos.
I got movies, yeah, and
movies. Wow.
Yeah, and we actually, just to show you how young and stupid we were, we took the motor trap covers out and rode the motors around the curves and everything. When you're young and stupid, you do stuff like that. But anyways, I just wanted to share that with you because it was certainly a memorable experience for us back in the 50s. So thanks again.
Like I say, the earliest one I remember is 1963, and then they had the ceremonial car at the end of the Canal line, which you had to be invited to, to ride. And then when the Riverfront line was established, they ran the 450 up and down St. Charles, because when it was being restored at Carrollton, it was on wide gauge trucks, and it had a wide gauge motor and trucks in it. And then was brought to Canal Street, transferred to standard gauge. So the car 29 was in front of it, and that was kind of like a charter. And then they had the 150th anniversary of the St. Charles line back in 1985. They had decorated cars, and they just had a celebration in October of last year, with the Pearlie Thomas cars becoming 100 years old. They had an open house at the car barn, but they don't do much. It's very expensive to rent a streetcar nowadays. So I tried to rent a car for my book when it came out in 2008, and I wanted to rent the 922 and put a desire plaque on it. They wouldn't have anything to do with it.
Well, Earl, renting a streetcar is not the only thing that's gone up in price lately since the 50s, but at any rate.
Actually, it's still $1.25 to ride the St. Charles line and the Canal line. And if you're a senior like me, you can get you can ride for 40 cents or get an all-day pass for 80 cents. So that's a bargain. The all-day pass also includes a ride on the Canal Street Ferry. So
sounds good.
Yeah, it's quite a deal. I know they've talked about raising the fares here, but I'm always under the impression that if you raise fares, less people will ride, and you got to raise fares again, and you lower the fare, more people will ride. So, but the transit system here was devastated with Katrina, never came back.
How's public safety riding the streetcars?
Pretty good. no problems with the streetcars. In fact, I haven't seen any problems with the outlying bus lines that go in not so nice areas in the city. But
Good.
You gentlemen mentioned ADA a little bit ago. I was at a conference a couple years ago, and they were stating that the average transit company spends 2 to 3 times the amount of money on ADA compliance than they do on maintaining their system in compliance. So that ADA has become the big budget killer within public transit companies trying to meet the requirement.
I can believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a moving target. It's constantly being upgraded. You know, as you put your wall signs up, and then 2 years later they say, "Oh no, the wall signs have to be a different height," and their logic is true, but it all costs money. And money
They didn't have to do anything to get the St. Charles line to be partially ADA compliant. They had the cars. All they had to do was paint them green to match the other cars. I would venture to guess that if we see maybe 3 wheelchairs a day on the St. Charles line, that's a lot. And you've got maybe 7 cars, regular service cars, and 2 wheelchair cars out there at one time. So
one other comment. One of the things I noticed the last time I was in New Orleans 2 years ago was the cruise ships seemed to bring bus loads of people up to the St. Charles line, and at a stop unload a bus load of people who are trying to get on the St. Charles streetcar. Is that a common occurrence, or?
I actually have never seen that.
I noticed it when we were down there. It was just weird to see these. I'm assuming they were cruise buses. I may be, but they'd be all
because the cruise lines originate and terminate in New Orleans, so there wouldn't be any reason for people to take a tour of New Orleans. It's not like a stop on the cruise, actual cruise itself. It's the beginning and the end for the cruise lines. Now,
maybe it was some senior citizen outing or something.
Might have been an oddball, like we get P&O every once in a while in here, or other celebrity, and it actually is a stop on the cruise. So that might have been the case where they said, "We'll take you to the St. Charles line. You're on your own from there." So.
The last time I was in New Orleans was in 2005 before the hurricane on a high school chorus trip. So I need to come back because we didn't do anything with the streetcars. So I missed out completely.
On a high school trip?
Yes. Yeah, my whole high school
what's that?
Yeah, in suburban Atlanta, chorus went. So we're gonna wrap it up there. Actually,
I put my my website name into the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you, George.
Okay, yes. Just wanted everybody to know that.
Perfect.
Yeah, that is a terrific website. I would highly recommend going there. You will see things. You will see things you wouldn't have thought you were captured on film. So very worthwhile.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. Speaking of worthwhile, Earl, for putting that together for us and sharing with our Pennsylvania Trolley Museum members and viewers from around the country and even some other countries today. So we really appreciate your time tonight. And I want to thank you. You're invited back anytime. And I hope to see the rest of you at next month's program, which is not officially a Trolleyology, but hopefully we'll see you there. And if not at that one, in October. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot, Christian. Thanks a lot, Christian, for putting it together.